We're here today to talk about some of the cultural aspects of working with global capability centres, also known as GCCs, in India. I'm Keith Warburton, CEO of Global Business Culture, and I'm joined today by my colleague Navkaran Singh, who's the senior consultant at Global Business Culture and who has worked on many GCC-related projects. This is going to be the first of a series of videos that we're going to record. This first video is a generic introduction to this topic, and then following on from this, we'll record a series of more specific videos on things like leadership capability, decision-making processes, etc. So now, let's just start off at the very basics. Lots of Western businesses open global capability centres in India. They approach the process. They think what we need to do is we need to find a location, we need to recruit a load of people, set up a load of processes, and it should be a fairly straightforward process. Lots of people have done it before, but it doesn't necessarily always go according to plan. So why might that be?
Okay, good. Well, this could take a very long time, but let's keep it nice and short. And I think the answer is kind of in your question, right? I think the companies, especially the Western companies, tend to solve, when they set up the GCC, the idea is that they will solve the technical side of things, the operational side of setting up a GCC. But I think one thing they underestimate, or in many cases, totally ignore, is the human side of things, right? There is that flawed assumption that because the GCC team speaks English, it uses the same tools, it uses the same processes, the alignment will be natural. I think the reality is the shared tools, the shared language doesn't equate shared assumptions about how the work needs to get done. So I think, in addition to other difficulties, which is many cases the technology or the time zones, I think it's the human side of things, the cultural, the business culture of the local country, especially India. I think that is underestimated in many cases. So I would say that's, in my experience, that is one of the key issues that we see where GCCs don't deliver to the level that's usually expected at the start.
Yeah, and we've worked on more than 200 of these projects, so we see that time after time after time that the cultural challenges kind of get in the way. Very briefly, what would you say would be a key misunderstanding that happens from a cultural perspective during this process?
I mean, there's a few things that we see recurring across many of our clients, especially when it comes to communication, right? So I'll give you some example just to kind of show you how, these things which are never talked about, they really play a key role. So silence, right? Silence in India is in many cases mistaken for agreement. In the West, especially in the HQ, which is usually in the West. So when the Indian team, they don't speak up or they don't push back, HQ assumes there's a buy-in, right? Which means, but in reality, it often means the opposite. The person stays quiet out of the respect for seniority, or to preserve the relationship in front of the group. So I think that's one of the examples. Or indirect communication, right? The indirect communication in general, Indian communication is quite indirect, right? Quite a relationship first, not as business first as the West. And I think indirect communication in India is perceived as evasiveness rather than kind of what needs to be said, right? Whereas Indian team is showing respect, professionalism, through the communication where you need to put relationship, respect, seniority, at the top of your mind, in addition to business, And I think the other thing where we see the friction and the role that plays is the hierarchy the seniority plays a big role in GCC in relation to most of the Western HQ teams, So the GCC members will less often contradict the manager in front of everyone. The issues raising an issue, escalations have very different definitions in India compared to the West. So all these behaviors, all these assumptions about what is right and wrong in terms of communication, escalation, meetings, I think these are never really talked about when the GC is set up. And I think these have fundamental issues and they have fundamental direct influence on operations, how things are done, the deadlines, the management. And I think so, this I can talk about many more examples, but
Yeah, I agree, and they're never talked about. And what we find is that very few companies come to us for help on this in the early stages. They wait until problems have arisen 12 months, 18 months down the line, and then they come and say, what's gone wrong. So what kind of practical steps can companies take at the early stages in a GCC build to make things work as effectively as possible?
Yeah, and I think I like that when that you mentioning early stages, because I think it's the early stage where the foundation either gets it right or it gets skipped, and then it really makes it much harder later on. And I think, as I mentioned, it's the human side of things. So I think one of the key things that many companies don't invest in is the building the cultural orientation, understanding what is the norm for my team in GCC in India? What are the expectations? What are the business norms in the US, in the UK, in Germany, or whichever country the HQ teams or the onshore team is sitting on? And I think, and it's not only training the GCC team, is also training the HQ teams. In many cases, the expectation is let's train the GCC team on the processes and everything they need to know. I think this asymmetry signals, that integration is a one-way street for the GCC team. So I think that is something that team needs to be aware of.
Yeah, and
The
you
other
and
thing,
you and you you found this yesterday in a meeting where somebody on the India side, very senior person on the India side, said to you that the people in the West, they've still got a colonistic mindset.
yeah,
They
I mean
just tell us
they're
what to
seen as a
do.
cost base. There's still the mentality, I think, which comes across to the GCC team that, that you, the main reason to go to the GCC is to reduce costs, and I think then the mentality in the GCC team and over time becomes that we are just a cost center. We are not strategic partners with our HQ, with the teams in the West, right? And I think that means there's that already the mindset about the accountability is not mine, the ownership is not mine, the outcome responsibility is not mine, is in the West. And I think that itself is a very bad start, if you want to build the right GCC.
And then, sometimes people will say, yeah, but these cultural issues are very soft, aren't they? They're not that critical, but they are absolutely critical. And when you get that level of dissatisfaction within the teams in India, which you do, one of the direct results of that is attrition. And we know that
Yeah.
attrition rates in GCCs are very high. And we know that attrition is a massive cost in terms of re-recruitment, retraining, mistakes being made, opportunity costs, etc. Okay, well, there's just a few of our thoughts generically on the whole global capability center issue in India. As I said earlier, we are going to deep dive into a few more specific issues in some later videos, but hopefully people who've watched this find this of help. Thanks very much, Nav, and I'll see you in the next
Yeah.
one.
See you in the next one. Thanks, everyone.